The punishment came before you understood the crime. Every morning, before dawn broke over the Caucasus Mountains, you would hear wings. Not the sound of birds moving through air, something heavier. A shadow crossing the face of the sun that hadn't fully risen yet. And then the eagle landed. It was not a natural creature. It had been bred specifically for this task, grown to the size that made it useful, made immortal so that nothing could interrupt its work. And its work was this. Every single morning, it tore open the chest of the man chained to the rock, reached inside, and ate his liver while he was still alive. He didn't die. He couldn't. He was a god. The chains held. The pain was absolute and complete, and there was no unconsciousness, no relief, no moment where the mind could retreat from what was happening to the body. And every night the liver grew back. This happened every day for 30,000 years. You might be asking what kind of person does something like this to another person? What kind of crime justifies 30,000 years of that specific suffering? The answer is, he gave humanity fire. That's it. He stole something that belonged to the gods, and he gave it to humans because he thought humans would die without it. And the being who ordered this punishment, who designed it, who had it built, who chose the mountain and commissioned the chains and raised the eagle, was not a tyrant, was not a villain in the way we use that word. He was Zeus, the king of the gods, the protector of justice. This is the story of Prometheus, and the longer you look at it, the more you realize it's not a story about the cruelty of the gods. It's a story about what happens when someone breaks the one rule that cannot be broken. To understand what Prometheus did, you have to understand what he was. He was a titan, second generation of divine beings, older than the Olympians, older than Zeus, products of the union between Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. In Greek cosmology, the Titans were the gods before the gods. They had ruled the world for an age called the Golden Age, when everything was in balance and time moved differently. Then Zeus led a war against them. The Titanomachy lasted 10 years. It was not a metaphorical war. In the Greek accounts, it involved actual physical combat on a scale that shook the foundations of creation. Mountains were used as weapons. The sea boiled. The entire structure of reality was at stake. Most Titans fought on their own side. Most lost. Prometheus was different. He had the gift of foresight. It's literally in his name, Prometheus, the one who thinks beforehand. He calculated the war. He ran the numbers. And he came to Zeus before the battle and said, "You're going to win, and I want to be on the winning side." He fought for Zeus. He helped Zeus win. This should have meant permanent safety, and for a while it did. Zeus gave Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus an assignment. They were to fill the new world with living creatures. They were to take the raw material of the earth and shape it into life, and give each creature the tools it needed to survive. Epimetheus went first. He was enthusiastic and immediate, and he gave animals everything: speed to the cheetah, strength to the lion, shells to the tortoise, venom to the snake, wings to the eagle. He filled the world with creatures perfectly equipped for the world they would live in. By the time he reached the last creature on his list, the humans, he had nothing left to give. No fur, no claws, no speed, no natural weapon of any kind. The humans would walk upright on 2 feet across a world full of predators, with no way to survive a winter, no way to hunt efficiently, no way to defend themselves. Prometheus looked at the humans and felt something the gods were not supposed to feel. Not sympathy exactly, something closer to a sense of responsibility. He had made a calculation about the Titanomachy, and that calculation had been correct. He made a calculation about the humans now. His calculation was, they will not survive. Fire was not a resource in the ancient Greek worldview. It was a technology. It was the specific thing that separated divine existence from animal existence. With fire, you could survive cold. You could cook meat, which meant you could digest more efficiently, which meant your brain could grow. You could see in the dark. You could forge metal. You could build structures that lasted beyond 1 generation. Fire was not warmth. Fire was the precondition for civilization. And Zeus had decided humans would not have it. The reasoning, from Zeus's perspective, was sound. The gap between mortals and immortals had to remain absolute. If humans had fire, They would become less dependent on the gods, less likely to worship, to sacrifice, to maintain the relationship of submission that kept the divine economy functional. Fire was not just practical, it was symbolic. It was the line. Prometheus knew this. He knew the rule existed, and he knew why it existed, and he understood the consequences of breaking it. He went to Olympus anyway. He walked into the workshop of Hephaestus, the god of the forge, the smith who made the weapons of the gods and the chains that would eventually hold Prometheus himself. He waited for a moment when he wouldn't be seen. And then he took a flame from the forge and he hid it inside the hollow stalk of a fennel plant, a plant that burns slowly from the inside, preserving the fire while appearing unlit from the outside. He carried it down to earth. He gave it to humans. The effect was immediate. Humans learned to cook. They learned to work metal. They learned to build fires at night, which meant they could work at night, which meant productivity doubled. The species that had been, in evolutionary terms, the most fragile creature on Earth, began its long process of becoming the species that would eventually alter the climate of the planet. Zeus watched all of this happen. He did not respond immediately. This is what makes Zeus interesting, and this is what makes his eventual punishment so revealing about how divine justice worked in the Greek imagination. He didn't strike Prometheus down in rage. He thought carefully. He consulted his own understanding of what justice required. He concluded that the punishment had to be proportional to the crime in a specific way. It had to be infinite. Because what Prometheus had done was not just a single act of theft. He had permanently changed the condition of humanity. He had made an irreversible alteration to the order of existence. The punishment, Zeus decided, would also be irreversible. The logistics of the punishment are, in retrospect, a kind of masterpiece of cruelty, not in the sense of randomness or excess, but in the sense of precision. Every element was specifically chosen. The location: Mount Caucasus at the edge of the known world. Far enough from Olympus to be inconvenient to visit, far enough from human civilization to be invisible. Present in the geography of the world as a warning that anyone who looked closely enough could find. The binding. Hephaestus was ordered to forge the chains. He did it, and multiple ancient sources note that he did it with reluctance. He was the craftsman of the gods, the one who understood materials and what they could do, and he understood exactly what he was making. The chains were made of adamantine, the same unbreakable alloy used in the weapons of the gods. There was no metallurgical solution, there was no force in the natural world that could break them. The agent, the eagle, specifically immortal, specifically unable to be harmed or driven away, specifically designed so that the intervention of any hero, any passing god, any sympathetic creature would be impossible. The injury, the liver. This is the detail that matters most, and it is not random. The ancient Greeks believed that the liver was the seat of emotion, not the heart, not the brain, but the liver, the organ where love and grief and rage were generated and stored. Zeus didn't want Prometheus to be in purely physical pain. He wanted him to feel. He wanted the seat of his feeling to be the thing that was consumed every day. The message was, you chose to care about humans. Here is what caring costs. And then there was the regeneration. Every night, the liver grew back. Complete, whole, ready for the next morning. This is the detail that separates the punishment of Prometheus from ordinary punishment, from ordinary suffering. It was not a sentence with an end date. It was a loop. It was designed to have no terminus. The same morning, every morning, forever. Hesiod, writing in the 8th century BCE, says this lasted 30,000 years. Let that number sit. 30,000 years ago, modern humans were still in the early Stone Age. We were living in small nomadic groups. We had not invented agriculture. We had not built a single permanent structure. 30,000 years before the first civilization, before the wheel, before writing, before Egypt, before any of the things that fire made possible, Prometheus was already chained to that mountain. And the other gods knew. They knew where he was. Some of them passed through the region and saw the chains and the eagle. Nobody intervened. Not because they didn't care, but because everyone understood that what Zeus had decreed could not be undone without Zeus's permission. No one asked for Zeus's permission. Until Heracles. Heracles found him. Traveling through the Caucasus on one of his labors, he saw the eagle, he saw the chains, he drew his bow, and he killed the eagle. He broke the chains. Zeus allowed it, not because he had forgiven Prometheus, but because he needed to. There was a prophecy. Prometheus knew something Zeus did not, the name of the goddess who would one day give birth to a son greater than his father. If Zeus had the wrong child, that son would eventually overthrow him. The pattern would repeat: Uranus overthrown by Kronos, Kronos overthrown by Zeus, Zeus overthrown by his own child. Prometheus had held that secret for 30,000 years. The price of his freedom was the answer. He told Zeus the name. Zeus arranged for the goddess Thetis to marry a mortal, a man named Peleus. Their son was Achilles. The gods don't forgive, but sometimes they negotiate. What the myth of Prometheus actually describes, stripped of the supernatural architecture, is the cost of unauthorized empathy. He looked at humans and decided their suffering mattered more than the rules. The gods decided otherwise, and the gap between those two positions was 30,000 years wide. The eagle comes back every morning, until the day it doesn't.